Hi guys, this is another video in my experienced teacher vlog. This one I'm going to talk about the online course that I've just done called Getting Ready for Robust Research. This is a course offered by the AIS as part of the experienced teacher through the action research pathway. And the aims are for participants to review literature and ask feasible research questions, choose appropriate research design, collect, analyze and interpret data, and prepare a research output. Now, I was fairly familiar with a lot of the stuff in the course. I've previously done an action research report as part of my MTeach at uni. And on top of that, being a science teacher, I had a fair idea of how reports look, like aims, results, discussions, stuff like that, how they look, and that was cemented, I suppose, through all the reading that I did for the literature review. Now, looking back, this was probably a good course to have done prior to the literature review and the project proposal, if you have had time to put 6 hours into that then. Because there were, especially some of the early modules in this course that were specifically looking at action research and some of the things in the project proposal. So if I had the time again, I probably would have done this prior to that last term, but I spent enough time on it as it was, so this was this term's job. So I talked about the research. So in this video I'm going to just go through a bit of an overview of the course, and in particular some of the things that I found interesting in the course. So research project process is to review literature, work out a question, test a question, collect data, analyze data, write it up, and then choose where to go with research from there. So that's brief overview. Yep. Cool, that stuff. One of the first things I found interesting was the operationalization, which is a big word that I hadn't heard of before, of unmeasurable constructs. So this means that we've got these sort of constructs in our minds and the students' minds that we want to measure, but they're not, don't have sort of tangible things that we can, or they're not tangible in themselves to measure. So we then have to look at some of the different dimensions and indicators that would show that. So an example that they've given is motivations. Motivation is something that you can't just look at somebody and work out how motivated they are. You need to look at the dimensions, both the intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, as well as within those dimensions, indicators. So breaking these down into actually researchable things that you can look at or ask students a question to get an idea of these indicators to then relate it back to their overall motivation. So this is something that's really important, especially in an educational context where you're not dealing with solid numbers, solid outputs in the same way that you are in sciences. So it's a good way to break that down and start thinking about that. The other thing I found interesting was looking at the research aims and questions and the different functions that they have, but also the different levels in the hierarchy, I suppose, of the research aims and questions, and then how you get that. So we start off with something like so this is your overall research, which is the purpose of this is to then put in a verb and then say what you're going to do. So the one for my project is the purpose of this project is to measure and evaluate the effect of self-paced mastery on outcomes and engagement of Year 9 students in a flipped gamified science classroom. So that one's a bit of a mouthful. But the idea of that aim is to basically sum up exactly what you're going to be looking at in your research report. And then from there you can actually look at, dive down deep and more specific into the little things that you're going to be looking at. So area of research, self-paced mastery for me. Research topics, which are going to be the outcome and engagement. Okay, so they're the two things that I'm looking at researching, outcome and engagement. A general question, the effect of self-paced mastery on outcomes and engagement. Okay, so that's coming up from the aim. And then looking at specific questions that you can ask that go into measuring those outcomes and engagement. And I'll look at, for this, I'll talk about the engagement part of it, because that's that I'm going to go back to that word. operationalization, there we go, of this engagement, like how do you actually measure engagement. So the specific question that I looked at was things like, are students motivated to complete more work in a self-paced mastery classroom compared to a control classroom? And then I can do my data collection in how I'm actually going to collect data for that. So I'm going to collect quantitative data and just look at the amount of compulsory work versus the optional work. So to compare whether they're doing more optional work in the self-paced mastery to what is available, what they have done from what's available to them, rather. So the quality of work. So do students attempt more challenging activities in that classroom? So rather than taking the easy road, do they try to challenge themselves and extend themselves, working out where they're at? So I can quantitatively look at those from the previous one, the stuff that they've done, particularly the optional stuff, and look at whether that is the small task difficulty or complexity, or whether it's the more higher order stuff. And so I'll relate that to Bloom's taxonomy and compare that to the control. So I can go through all these different factors that can go into engagement and look at exactly how I'm going to measure them as part of my project. And I'd thought about the project. I've done a previous video about my first thoughts about the project, but this was a really good sort of systematic way to really drill down onto what it is that I want to test in the project and how it is that I'm going to test those. So I thought that that was a really good activity. Now, these sorts of things are stuff that for the course I needed to put into a research planning booklet. So it looked like this. Research topics. So I've put all these things in. Problem is that this research booklet doesn't allow space for all the other things that I've put in, but they also ask you to put that stuff online to the learning management system that they have, and the administrators of the course actually go in there and comment on things and give feedback, ask questions, stuff like that. So this is the booklet that got submitted at the end, but there was more information that was submitted throughout the course. Okay, education research, there's 9 of them. Most of them don't matter for a classroom teacher, but looking at action research, which is what we decided, and survey research. So that's looking at conducting surveys, basically, qualitative data, which is something that I'm going to do as part of this project, because again, motivation can't all be done looking at hard numbers. So I'm going to survey students to get some of those underlying roots of that motivation. So looking at a longitudinal, surveying them, doing something, surveying them again, good times. Some of the data cleaning stuff, and this was on, so we're going into data manipulation now and what to do with the data. So data cleaning was something that was interesting. I sort of nerd out about Excel, so I found that quite interesting. Then I've gone to qualitative here. I'll get back to quantitative in a sec. So there's a couple of different ways to look at quantitative analysis, in particular when you've got that open-ended analysis. So in qualitative analysis, there's a difference between, for example, a survey, or I'm going to use the 2 examples that I'm doing, a survey where you've got a closed question, and on a Likert scale, you might go from 1 to 5, for example. In a open-ended question, looking at surveys to find those underlying things, there's different ways to actually process that data or analyze that data, looking at coding for themes and coding for things that keep on coming up and stuff like that, trying to get that qualitative data into some sort of quantitative form, as well as just looking at themes and stuff that keep popping up, so you can throw some little quotes here to support a theory or a conclusion that you've made in your project. Okay, so looking at quantitative data now, so some of the different statistical analyses, and there's a whole heap of different statistical analyses, and they didn't go into a whole heap of detail about the different ones, probably so that they're not scaring people, but there were some resources in there that were linked to actually just YouTube videos, but to work out what it is and how to use it. I also found this on the internet, which is just looking at a flowchart, so looking at the different types of data that you have, coming up to which statistical analysis to perform on it. I think I'm going to be doing, what did I work out? Probably the t-test and a Pearson's R linear association. So they're probably the two that I'm going to look at with the data that I'm looking at. But I'll look at more of that once I actually have the data. There was a scaffold for a report to follow for the project, which is great. It follows basically the report that you'd be familiar with from reading scientific literature, and then putting a timeline together from your project rather. So that's where the course put me at the moment. My next stage is to start actually working on producing materials for this project. It's not going to I'm in the stage of getting resources and the online platform sorted at the moment. I won't be doing the test until probably starting in mid-term 1, finishing by late term 2, or mid to late term 2. We'll see how we go. Looking at those two there. So that's the stage I'm in at the moment. Next week I'm going down to Sydney to do a course in a bit more in action research and look at some things that people have done in the past. So that should be good. And yeah, I hope this helps someone. Thanks for watching, guys. Peace out.